Hello everybody, today we are going to be reviewing the Apple iPhone 15 Pro Max versus the Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra. So let's see if you should get a Samsung or an Apple. Because the Apple iPhone 15 Pro Max just launched like a week ago, 2 weeks ago. So is it worth your money to get an older but Android Samsung Galaxy S23 Ultra, which is the best Samsung phone available right now, or the brand new Apple iPhone 15 Pro Max? Let's see. So, they were both released this year, although the iPhone was released a few months, or like half a year after the Samsung phone. So it is technically newer. It is the Apple iPhone 15 Pro Max is lighter, a little lighter than the Samsung S23 Ultra, but the Samsung S23 Ultra has nano SIM, nano SIM and eSIM, or dual SIM, or like two nano SIM, like dual nano SIM and eSIM. But Apple took a surprising turn with only doing dual eSIM in the US. So you cannot transfer your physical SIM card that you've had for years. You have to get a new eSIM or just transfer your thing to eSIM. So the Samsung S23 Ultra has an aluminum frame. The 15 Pro Max actually has titanium this year, which it's more scratch resistant, that's what I was saying. It's more scratch resistant, and it's harder to see fingerprints on, so it looks better. But in being more scratch resistant, that those scratches, you can see the scratches a lot better when it is scratched deeply. And then they both have IP68, although Apple is actually better. It's up to 6 meters for 30 minutes, while Samsung is 1.5 meters for 30 minutes. And of course, Samsung has stylus. The Apple doesn't. I'm not even sure if it has support for stylus. Okay, so now on to displays. So the Apple iPhone 15 Pro Max has an LTPO Super Retina XDR OLED 120Hz HDR10 Dolby Vision 1000 nits 2000 nits display. So 2000 nits. And then the Samsung S23 Ultra has a dynamic OLED AMOLED 2x 120Hz HDR10 plus 1200 nits 1750 nits peak. That's really confusing. But basically, the Samsung one, it has a better display technically, but the iPhone has more nits for peak brightness. The Samsung S23 Ultra has a 0.1 inch bigger screen than the Pro Max. while also having more screen to body ratio, which is a term I use quite commonly on this channel, which basically means less bezels. So it does have slightly more screen to body ratio than Apple, but just barely. So yes, the iPhone does have slightly bigger bezels than the Samsung, but since the Samsung wraps around like it's a curved display, you can barely tell it has bezels at all. And then the Samsung does have more PPI, which stands for pixels per inch. And onto the OS. Apple's running iOS 17, which is amazing compared to iOS 16. But the Samsung, it ships with Android 13, but as of right now, Android 14 is still in the beta phase, and only a few phones actually have the ability to have Android 14 beta, this one not being one of them. So it still has the latest version of Android 13, but it will be upgradable to Android 14. So onto the chips. The Apple phone has an Apple A17 Pro 3nm chip. Samsung has a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 4nm chip. So the nanometers are basically how big the chips are. So Apple's chip is smaller, which you could do two things with the space. You could not do anything with it, which would make it more battery efficient, or you could make it more powerful. Apple's chosen to make it more battery efficient. So yeah, Apple's probably is a little faster though because it's a 3nm. And then the CPU, Samsung does technically have a better CPU because it's octa-core instead of Apple's hexa-core, which I believe is 2 more cores. Onto the GPU, I would say the Apple GPU is better, just because it's smoother, but it's kind of hard to compare them just because they're like completely different like phones and chips sets, so it's pretty hard to compare them, but I'd say the winner of that one goes to Apple. Okay, so now onto the memory. Apple has introduced 8 gigabytes of RAM, which Apple users are saying has been highly needed, like upgrading the RAM from 6 gigabytes on the 14 Pro Max to 8 gigabytes on the 15 Pro Max. But it doesn't match at all Samsung's 12 gigabytes of RAM. They both have 1 terabyte max storage, and Samsung does have a lot more options, as well as an option for 8 gigabytes of RAM. So I'd say the winner of that definitely goes to Samsung. So yeah, onto the camera. So their cameras, on paper, Samsung's is technically a lot better, with their back camera having 200 megapixel for the main camera and 210 megapixel for periscope telephoto and telephoto, and then a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera. And then the ability for 8K for 30 FPS, 4K 60, 1080p at 240, and 1080p at 9 60 FPS. That's like PC FPS. Then Apple's does have 48 megapixel main camera, which nothing technically compared to Samsung's 200 megapixel. A 12 megapixel periscope telephoto and a 12 megapixel ultra wide. But it does have a dual LED tone flash instead of a single LED, so that's slightly better. But then the video is also it does have options for cinematic mode and ProRes, and an all new option for 3D spatial video, which is basically the point of that is so that you can enjoy it in 3D with surround sound if you are on a Apple Vision Pro, if you have one. So it's kind of like an exclusive feature, but it's cool that it has it, I guess. But here's the reality. Samsung's looks way better on paper, right? But I have tested and watched other testings of those cameras, and Apple's camera is more saturated, and it has richness that the Samsung cannot provide. And it also has way better night, dark photos, night photos. So I'd just give it a draw, for cameras, just because Samsung technically is way better, but Apple's looks way better and is more appealing to the average user. And then for selfie camera, Apple has a 12 megapixel front camera, and Samsung also has a 12 megapixel front camera. They can both do 4K at 60 FPS, but only the iPhone can do 1080p at 120 FPS, as well as doing 4K and more FPS options to 24, 25, and 30, and 60. So it has double the FPS options for that. It also has 24, 30, 60, and 120 FPS options for 1080p. While Samsung only has 30 FPS. So front camera winner definitely Apple. They have the same speakers, basically same Bluetooth. Faster USB-C on the Samsung though, compared to the Apple, which does have USB-C this time around. Samsung also has a bigger battery and definitely more color options. So yeah. That's it for this video. If you haven't already, make sure to like and subscribe. And until next video, it's Tech Now later. Peace.